All right, welcome to the next part of our video series here in Unit 1, the whole introduction to precision ag. So in the first series, we looked at kind of putting that definition of defining what precision ag is, looking at the brief history of it. In this session here, we're going to kind of take a look at why do we need to worry, why is precision ag so important, and what does it actually do? So to kind of begin with is looking at the why. I'm going to play a little video clip here. This was produced by BASF a few years ago. Even though it is a few years old, it still gives us a really good reasoning or an understanding of why are we doing this? Why do we need to use precision ag? So take a look at this video. There's some pretty staggering statistics with this, and when you kind of think about it, you know, the role of the American farmer these days is at the utmost importance of what it ever has been. So take a few minutes, watch this video, and then we'll pick it up after that. So what do you think? Kind of interesting, huh? Excuse me. So it does kind of give you some perspective of why we need to worry about precision ag. and why it's so important in what we're doing. So the biggest question a lot of people asked is, what can Precision Ag do for me? How can it help? Well, the best way it does, and we've kind of seen this a little bit earlier, kind of alluded to it, it allows us to take a look at a field's variability and try to make the best utilization of it. So the image you have there in front of you, that is from our college farm. That is actually our soil map. And what we're looking at there is the CSR ratings. For those of you that don't know, CSR stands for Corn Suitability Rating. And basically it gives a rating of how good is that soil at producing a crop. And so the way it's color-coded, as you can probably guess, red is not so good, green is really good. So when we're looking at that college farm, what you're looking at there is about 133 acres. And we could see, we have a good chunk of the farm that has that nice green color, which means it's really good at growing crops in that area. But we also have some areas that are concerned. Now, if I go out there with a certain variety of corn, that variety of corn may thrive in certain parts of the soil, but not in others. And without Precision Ag, without knowing some of that variability, not looking at it, I wouldn't have probably been making the best decisions in some areas. Now with Precision Ag, we can look at this and say, hey, with this type of soil, this type of CSR rating, here's what we maybe need to think about in terms of fertilization or this type of seed, some of that. So this is how it can help. And the best way it does, it allows us to start utilizing our inputs more efficiently. And those inputs would be things like fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides. We're now looking at how good can we place our seed, getting that seed placed ideally so it's not competing with other seeds, but still has the right access to the right nutrients. So those are some of them, but probably the biggest thing that we've seen out of Precision Ag and how it can help, some of the biggest things has been in terms of labor and what it's cost us and what it has saved us, as well as what it's done for our machinery cost. Being able to utilize that machine, through the use of auto steering. Maybe I don't have to, maybe I'm going to cut 2 or 3 trips out of the field, through the field, because now I've maximized the width of my planter or the width of my, if I'm field cultivating. So those are where we have really seen probably the best parts, or where Precision Ag is being utilized the best. So in terms of how it's being used, Precision Ag, is being used in a lot of aspects of agriculture. Primarily, and we'll take a look at each one of these in a little bit more greater detail, but probably the biggest place where we see it being utilized is in crop production, the whole agronomic area. What we also see is we're starting to see some where we can utilize it in terms of livestock production, utilizing GPS trackers on cows and things. The forestry is an agricultural industry, and there's a lot of uses where we're seeing Precision Ag being utilized in that industry. Also in conservation management. As we take a look at the world around us, conservation is becoming a bigger thing. Real estate. As we look at real estate's effect on farming, and utilizing Precision Ag to that extent, as well as logistics and transportation. So to kind of break those down, like I said, in crop production is the biggest area where we'll see that. So here's kind of this nice little life cycle of a typical year, typical crop cycle. And at any point in that cycle, we could see Precision Ag is being used. So we could start there at the top with the combine going through the field. There's a GPS on that combine, and it's recording how good is those beans coming through the combine. So it's making a map. It's recording that data. We take that data, we download it to the computer, which is our next step in the cycle. And there's the farmer sitting there at the computer looking at his yields and making determinations on what should I do for the next year. And maybe he's looking at the screen saying, there's an area that probably didn't do so well. Maybe I need to take a look at that. So he's going to call his agronomist. So his agronomist goes out there with the pickup. And on top of that pickup, you can see there's a GPS receiver. And he pulls a soil sample. And he's going to pull numerous soil samples. Takes those soil samples, sends them to a lab, and that lab comes back and says, well, here's some things you can do. So we're going to turn around and put that information into our tractor when we go to plant that spring, which is our next step of the cycle. So we're going to utilize some of what we learned from the soil maps, what we learned from harvesting the year before, make some decisions, and we're going to record our yields. We're going to not record our yields, record our plants and our varieties going through the field at planting time. Well, then after the crop comes up, our lovely assistant there, their crop scout, is going to go out and take a look at the crops. Utilizing a GPS on their tablet, they're going to take pictures and notes of maybe some weeds they see in the field or some insects, some areas of concern. We're going to go back and take that to our ag service provider, who's then going to come up with a recommendation of maybe we need to do some fertilizing out there, some additional fertilizing, or do some spraying. And once again, that's all being controlled by a GPS. And then that leads right back into harvest, where then we start the cycle all over again. So as you can see, in every aspect of the crop production cycle, we see precision ag being utilized. So a little bit different aspect, as I said earlier, we're starting to see it in livestock production a little bit. The main things what we're looking at is identification, utilizing RFID ear tags. So as that cow comes through, comes up to the feed bunk, scans the ear tag and says, oh, it's this cow. Well, this is how much she's eaten the last few days. This is what she's gaining. So this is how much feed we need to put in front of her. So identification has become a huge thing. Another one is looking at location. The picture of the cow there you see on the screen, what you see around her neck is a GPS tracker. There's been some studies where they put GPSs on cows as they grazed a pasture, and some researchers have found that there's some really distinctive patterns when it comes to grazing. And it answered a lot of questions as to what is the grazing habits of cows. Feeding and milking. Once again, using an RFID, as a dairy cow comes into the stanchion to be milked, it's going to scan her, it's going to record all that information as to how much milk she produced out. It's also going to dictate what should we do for feeding. Where we see it in tracking movements, electronically tracking where has this cow or where has this bull or where has this animal, what locations has it been at. It started off with this farmer and then this farmer sold it to this person. We're also seeing health and the status of the animal. There's sensors out there that even have a GPS beacon on them. So it's constantly sending out, here was the GPS location of this animal, and here was its health status. Here's what its body temperature was. Here's what its heart rate was. Here's what its what its health is. And if it's something that one of those ratings falls out of the normal parameters, it's going to notify the producer right away. We're also seeing it used in the transportation to effectively move the animals. How can we make a more efficient use of getting them from point A to point B? What it all boils down to on the livestock side, this is something that has been talked about, what's called National Animal Identification System, where basically every animal in the U.S. is going to be able to be tracked. So that way, in case there's a disease outbreak, we can quickly track where that animal has been at. And so if there's other animals we need to go investigate as potential carriers. This is something that has been talked about for years. Nothing is in place yet, but don't be surprised at some point if we do see this come up. Another thing that we've seen is what's called the COOL, which is the country of origin labeling. So once again, it's back to that tracking and that transportation is where did this animal product come from? Which country did it come from? So we're going to start seeing a lot more livestock, how livestock are being utilized in terms of precision ag. As I mentioned earlier, forestry, just a few ideas. Utilizing precision ag, GPS, and software to identify certain species of trees, their growth habits. As we're harvesting trees for lumber, we're basically creating fields of trees, but tracking their growth, knowing those locations. Probably one of the biggest things, and you can kind of see that map there on the right-hand side, tracking forest fires. We now have software where we can go in and say, here's where the fire is at and map it in there, but then also apply weather logic and say, okay, here's what the weather forecast calls for, and it can start predicting where can that forest fire spread. So that way we can, allocate our forest firefighters more effectively. So that are some of the things that we see coming. In terms of conservation, this is getting to be a huge area of precision ag. And there's numerous examples. Being able to track wetlands, as well as, track what's going on in those wetlands, what has happened in terms of what has changed. Looking at conservation reserve programs, monitoring those and outlining them, and then following through on it and keeping track. What we've seen a lot of times is what's been referred to as the dead zone down in the Gulf of Mexico. So what we're utilizing software. We're utilizing data that's been gathered, collected in the fields, and how much of what we've done as farmers are we responsible for. And so we kind of see that being utilized in terms of the conservation side. As I mentioned, real estate. You pick up a flyer these days of an upcoming land auction, you're going to see where precision ag is being used on there because they're utilizing it to highlight the field boundaries. If you look at that flyer that's there on the right-hand side, you see a couple aerial images on there. Those aerial images, it may be a little hard to see, but you can kind of see where they've outlined it. That was done utilizing precision ag. But by utilizing precision ag, we can very easily and very quickly calculate out the CSR values, that corn suitability rating that I mentioned earlier. We can also put in the soil types in there and know what those soil types are, what they can do. The thing is, a lot of that has been utilized to help determine what is a true and accurate land value for that piece of land. We've also seen it being utilized in cash rent. Saw this several years ago where they utilized precision ag to say, here's what's been going on this farm. This is what we think it's worth in terms of cash rent. Or we've seen where farmers say, here's the data that I've collected in this field, and you've been wanting me to pay this much. Well, I can show you that this farm is not worth that much. So we've seen where precision ag has kind of had an impact in determining cash rates. So anyway, that kind of concludes this little part of the lesson. Kind of, once again, looking at what is precision ag and what it does. So at this point, you can go ahead and take a break, and then we can pick up in the next video series. Thank you.